Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
So I want to say hello to Connor-Sinclair from LJ Social. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So for those of you who may not be familiar, what's your focus and the focus of LJ Social when it comes to engaging with entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so before we started recording, we were chatting about the industry that I play in, and I have a public relations and corporate marketing background, and now I support early stage entrepreneurs, solopreneurs in building their organic social media content, building their personal brands, and really helping their businesses get seen, because there are so many incredible entrepreneurs that are excellent at what they do and have fantastic ideas, but just aren't able to get their businesses seen. They're not visible. It doesn't matter if you have the best idea in the world, but if nobody knows that it exists, you're kind of hooped. So I get to play in a sort of fun startup, small business, solopreneur environment and help some really incredible people that want to make impact start to set the foundation to actually do that.
When it comes to working with entrepreneurs, where do you find them? And what I mean by that is their state. Are they, to your point, like they're not being seen, but there are some, I'll call it extroverts, but there's plenty of entrepreneurs, myself included, that don't like being the center of attention.
Yeah.
Not to make this about me, but there was a time when I would be absolutely petrified to stand up in front of 10 people and speak. Mm-hmm. But now I can speak in front of hundreds as long as I'm speaking about something I'm passionate about. So where do you find your entrepreneurs in terms of the state of their willingness to be seen? I'll call it recognition of what needs to be done to be seen. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I love that you share your own experience. So I'm actually an introvert as well. And a lot of people think I'm an extrovert because I have the ability to act introverted, although I need to take about a 3-hour nap after. But I am an introvert by nature. And
we have our moments, but we also like our quiet time.
Yeah, like I can do it. I owned a CrossFit gym for 5 years. So like I can do it. I can do the performance. I can turn it up, but yeah, it makes me really tired. But as an introvert, so like I can relate to all of that, but I meet people exactly in the place that you actually just described. Is usually, I tend to work with female entrepreneurs. A lot of my clients are also mothers. I am a mother. I have young children myself. Mm-hmm. So I usually meet them in a state of paralysis when it comes to fear, because it's this idea of, okay, I'm an entrepreneur. I have this business idea, or I have this business that I've been doing for a couple of years, but the business is fundamentally me, right? Mm-hmm. It's the entrepreneur. They're a solopreneur. And so they're in a season of their business where they are the one that needs to be seen, but there is massive fear attached to that, right? It's that external story of what are people going to say? What do I even say? Who cares what I have to say? And so for me, it's a lot of undoing those narratives for people and sort of recognizing that, it's a shift from, there's a big difference between a personal social media account and a business one. And for me, the shift that I had to make was recognizing that me showing up, allowing myself to be seen is actually my job. And as somebody that came from a corporate background, I was very good at doing my job, doing the things that were expecting of me. And so shifting from myself even being behind other brands to a place where I'm the one that I am the face of my brand. I am my brand. that for me was even really scary. So being able to guide other people through that shift is really important. And there's a few things that we shed along the way, and external validation is a big piece of that, I think, in the social media space, because that can feel really scary. But the other side of it is just shifting the mindset to like, it is your job as an entrepreneur to allow yourself to be visible. And there's, layers of mindset complications that come with that. But I think the biggest piece is really just shifting like that it is a task that has to be done in your job.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we find the ways that are most comfortable, that make the most sense, right? Every business needs to be visible in different places. And some of it is building the strategy, and then also building the strategy in terms of where, but then also shaping the messaging in a way that feels authentic to that person, right? And to your point, when you said I'm great at talking about things I'm passionate about, most entrepreneurs are really passionate about their business, right? There's very few people that, so at least that I work with, that started a business that they don't like. They start a
Right.
business because it's something that they deeply care about and they want to create impact. And so some of it is just shifting that narrative within themselves to recognize that if you want to create the impact that you do, like if you're ready for it, there are some mental hurdles that we have to get through.
Is it a matter of them having the proverbial imposter syndrome, or is it they are feeling stuck, or they feel their business is stuck, or is it like sort of a combination of those sorts of issues?
It's a combination. I think there's a fear of failure, but there's also this like fear of success, right? This like, well, what happens what if I make it? What if, my business takes off? Like, then what? What does
Kind of
that
like, what
look
if it
like?
changes me? Not
What if
necessarily,
it changes me?
not
Or what if I
necessarily for the
can't
better.
handle it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or what if I can't handle it? Or what if I get put on this platform that I wasn't ready for, and then I fall? So I think that's a really big one. But yeah, I think, the one thing that I've worked with hundreds of people in my business at various stages, and certainly in corporate environment as well. I think we all have some degree of imposter syndrome. We all carry that. And I think, the one thing that I think a lot of people wait for is just to feel confident. Oh, once I feel confident, it'll be okay. But the reality is like, that's not coming. And when you're an entrepreneur, you're
Let me know
never going
when
to feel confident.
that ship comes in.
Right. Like you're never going to feel confident when you're doing something for the first time, which is what entrepreneurship is, right? It's a series of doing scary things on repeat for the first time. And so I think for a lot of people, it's just the realization that what you actually need is courage. You're not, if you're waiting for confidence to come, you're going to be waiting for a long time. And just allowing yourself to be courageous in the moment and do the thing that is a little scary. Is the thing that's going
Well,
to
what
get
have
you.
you found with the different people you've worked with to get them to do those variety of scary things on repeat? Is it,
Yeah.
to your point, they don't necessarily have the confidence? So is it just less about them building the confidence and more about mitigating the fear,
Yeah.
or like, is there some accountability that's embedded in that?
I think, yeah, there's a big accountability piece. And I think that's, why I've been able to be successful. Yes, I have my agency and we do the social media work, but I'm also a business coach and a business mentor to a lot of these women. And one of the biggest things is like knowing they're not alone, right? Like there's this feeling of entrepreneurship that it's like, oh, it's so lonely, right? But it's really only as lonely as you make it. And I think
Right.
that, one of the things that I'm able to do is I've made a lot of mistakes as an entrepreneur. I'm in year 10 of
Mhm.
entrepreneurship, and, a lot of things go well and a lot of things don't go well. And I think knowing that you have somebody on your side and like, hey, you can do this. For a lot of people, it's just that feeling of, actually, maybe I don't have to do this alone, right? Like Laura's got my back, or whoever's in my world that has my back as I do this scary thing. But I think it's also knowing that, the one thing I talk to my clients a lot of the time, especially when we're building personal brands, right, where you're having to show up as yourself on the internet, is that, your first time you do something isn't going to be very good. So let's just like accept that that's the case. And, a year from now, you're going to look back at it and be like, well, that was not great. But let's stop aiming for A plus all the time,
Right.
right? Like if you did C minus, B plus, B minus, like content somewhere in there, and did that consistently, eventually that'll turn into A minus. Like I wouldn't even give myself an A plus. I'm like probably B plus, A minus still, like it's really expensive to create content like that. And I think sometimes it's just like permission to try, be willing to look a little silly. Are you willing to make a mistake? Because I think every failure is just a course correction to where it is that you're
Mhm.
supposed to be.
Well, do you help them shift away from the cliche, perfect is the enemy of the good, Like to your
Yeah.
point about don't get hung up, you know, a C plus is great for some people. Like just ship it, as they say, as opposed to getting hung up on. We're going to do
Yeah.
this one thing, and it's got to be absolutely fantastic. But you're putting way too much pressure on that one thing, and if it disappoints, then you spend the next little while just beating yourself up.
Yeah, I think this is like a big difference between corporate and entrepreneur, the scrappy
Mhm.
world, right? Like I come
Yeah.
from a corporate environment. I managed all the social media for one of the biggest German automotive companies in the world. And let me tell you,
Mhm.
everything had to be perfectly polished and perfect, right? Like
Yep.
we're talking,
Mm.
you know, thousands of dollars being spent on the production of a single like YouTube video or a single, Instagram Reels wasn't a thing at the time, but I'm
Yep.
sure,
Mhm.
I have no doubt that they're spending thousands of dollars on production on 30-second reels, right?
Yep.
That's great for one of the biggest luxury automotive companies in the world.
Good
What
for you.
that doesn't make good for you, right?
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
that doesn't make sense for most entrepreneurs, right? Most small businesses aren't going to do that. And so when we compare ourselves to these brands that are making this perfectly polished, they're pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars a year into creating A plus content, some of which doesn't do that well. On the flip side, for entrepreneurs, if you just think about creating C plus content, like stop looking at that, right? Don't worry about that. You're going to do what you're going to do. And making really, really high production content takes a really long
Right.
time. It's really expensive. You have to have the resources. And the reality is, you can do so much with just your phone that can go viral, that can change your entire business. But it starts with actually having to do it, right? If you don't do it because you're so worried about it being perfect,
You
then
have to
it's
pull out
never
your
going to get
phone.
you
Yeah,
anywhere.
at some point, you have to
You
pull out your
have
phone.
to do it. Yeah. Like if you you don't, then you're going to be in the same spot. So, to your point about like, where do I find people? To circle back to that, I think it's in this place of like, I know that I have to do this, but I don't, I feel scared. And I have this idea that it has to be this really perfect thing. But I'm like, hey, like let's, I show up for shoots sometime with my clients, the people that are local to me. The cool thing about the internet is I'm fortunate to have clients all over the place, but the ones that are local to me are driving distance. I'll show up to do like a social media content creation session, and they're like, "Well, where's your camera?" I'm like, "I have it. I just have my phone." Like that's all we need. Trust me, right? Like if you trust me, you do not want me to bring the video crew. That was not in budget, so we're gonna do this all on my phone and your phone, and it's gonna be perfect. And the clients are always amazed at what we can produce with just a phone.
Well, I have a degree in film production. I worked in the industry,
Yeah,
and you can do a better job with your phone than the equipment I had available during film school. Uh,
I bet.
and there was an entire building that was our editing and studio building, and most of what was equipped in that building is now resident on a MacBook Pro. So
Wow.
yeah, the world
Wow.
has shifted. But to your point about and the name of the show is low production, high value. But this idea
Yeah.
of um, when it comes to the personal brand and getting them willing to, I'll call it forego production value. I talk about don't get hung up on production. The trade-off between high production value and immediacy, authenticity,
Yeah.
being more human. And I've shared it
Yeah.
and we do a lot of work in financial services, and I've shared examples in this case from TikTok of the CEO of a bank literally sitting in the lunchroom of the bank, and a colleague is recording him on an iPhone, and he, in one video that's less than 2 minutes, is explaining his philosophy of leadership, and in another video, he's sharing 3 books that have informed his style for management, his leadership, and just inspiration in general. And there's no special lighting, no special
Mhm.
microphone, nothing. It's like so raw, just shot on a phone, and then they're using whatever app available that's either free or near free to add captions. And I
Yeah.
show this to financial services companies who, like your German car example, are used to spending tons of money on content, and you
Yeah.
go, "This is what you're up against."
Yeah. It's
So
like,
I,
are
I
you
want,
willing to be scrappy?
well, not just scrappy, but do you have conversations about when it comes to the personal brand where you're saying to your clients saying there's an element of authenticity, which means
Yeah.
you're a little more raw, a little more human, a little more vulnerable, and does that make them uneasy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we are in this season, I think now more than ever, where people want to buy from people, right? They want to feel like there's an actual human connection. I think that when we're dealing with small business, even more so, right? Like we're dealing with, well, why would I buy from you when I could go buy that on Amazon, or where there's a bigger company that maybe I
Right.
trust a little more that could do that? I mean, I'm in an industry where, there's thousands of social media agencies. There are thousands of people that you could hire to guide you in your business. But there's people that find me on the internet on the day that they find me, and they'll message me and say, hey, I just found you. Can we be best friends? And how do I work with you? Right. And it's because I just genuinely am like, well, this is who I am in this moment. Imperfect. I just be who it is that I am. And so I think, when we talk about being able to move quickly, right, and being able to create actual human stories, I think that that's the piece that a lot of brands miss. And so a lot of people will come to me and they say, I've got the social media account for my brand and nobody's engaging, or it's just not growing. It's not doing very well and nobody's buying. And I go and look at the account and it's just pictures of their products or talking about their service. There's not a single face to be found on there. There's no human element. It's like, well, let's start there. Like social media it inherently needs to be social, and that starts with being human. And I think where, if someone were to come to me and say, hey, we want to hire you for social media, and I say, great, who's going to be the person on camera? Because it's not going to be me. So, well, we don't have anybody. I'm like, look, like I won't be able to help you in this season of your business.
Right.
Like I need a face. I need a human, because we can try to keep all the trending sounds in the world and, make flashy videos. But at the end of the day, when you're in this season of your business where you are now, which is, the people that I work with trying to get to that first, 7-figure year in their business, they need a face. If you're not willing to allow yourself to be seen or have somebody in your company be seen, right? Like you need a face, and you're not going to be successful on social media without one in this season. And I think that's where a lot of brands get it wrong. I think there are bigger brands, like the German automotive companies don't necessarily need that, because they're well known at that point, right? Like It depends on where you are with your brand, but certainly if you're an up and coming business and you're trying to get yourself seen and you don't have a face, you're already at a disadvantage.
Well, and to your point, there's not that many car companies that have a human face to them. Like Lee Iacocca was the face of Chrysler for a while. For those that remember him, maybe you have a spokesperson for a car, but that's not the same as when it's at a local level. I might buy a car from a dealership because of how the salesperson made me feel in the interaction, and you're seeing a lot more salespeople at the dealership level be social and use social to humanize themselves and so on. But that leads me to a question about that still on that thread of being human, authentic, vulnerable from a personal brand point of view, but getting your clients comfortable with that, and also recognizing that you can't always be promoting the product or the service. You can't always be pitching. Using another car example, a friend of mine works for one of Canada's oldest car dealerships, and he said nobody goes to a dinner party and walks up to a complete stranger and say, "Hey, psst, it's a really good promo on the latest Cadillac Escalade. Are you interested?" And they're like, "What? Who are you?" That just doesn't work. And so it's befriending someone first, building a rapport and trust. And I know you know this, but I'm just curious about what kind of journey you take your clients on, where you're getting them away from being, I'll call it, too pitchy, too sales focused, and more about the likability quotient.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins. Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com.
Yeah, I think, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, just about most entrepreneurs started their business because they had a problem, right? Or they solved a problem for themselves, or they, identified something in their own life. And so they're passionate about it. And I think a lot of the time it comes from where we begin, is really looking at their own story. Like, why did you create this business? Why does this matter to you? And then trying to pull out the elements, the story narrative that are aligned to the brand. And whether that's, you think about that as content pillars, or you think about that as thought leadership ideas, like what are the other things that are relevant to this story of your business? Because it's not just, this is my widget, or this is I build websites, or this is the service I provide. Like there's always a stronger narrative behind it. And usually, when I think about myself and my own business, the person that I help is kind of like an old version of myself, right? The version of myself where I was coming out of my corporate job, and I owned a CrossFit gym for 5 years, and then COVID happened and I was 8 weeks pregnant with my son. And it was like, well, I guess I have to figure this out, and was able to start my business really quickly. And, I have a marketing and PR background, so that I had those
Kind of
elements.
helps.
It kind of helped. Yeah. It makes a big difference. But the person that I help is not dissimilar to who I was then. And so when I think about, when I'm starting a new engagement with somebody, it's like, who's the person that you're helping, right? Are they an old version of you? What is the narrative here? And so really what it becomes about is less about product and more about story. And what are the elements of the story that are associated to your business? Because every business has one, even if it's, the most basic, boring, even if you're like digging post holes or whatever, right? Like what the most basic businesses need to have stories, because otherwise it's, not interesting for social media. And so what we try to put things through the lens of, like, would you engage with this? Would I follow this? Would this be interesting? Because just posting a picture of, to go to post holes, right? If it's somebody digging a hole, that's not exactly exciting. So really just trying to find, the elements of story and narrative in there, because people buy from people, but they also, stories is what pulls on emotion, and emotion is what dictates most purchases.
Well, I saw something recently where I think it was a library, and they had put signs on the book carts in the library, and of different names. And so one was called Carty B. And I've bookmarked it, and to say, like, it's getting organizations and people within them to reframe their thinking, that you would be surprised about what is content.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing bookstores and libraries actually just killing it on social. I think there's a library in Minnesota or Wisconsin that's doing a fantastic job on TikTok, but it's um, leading with storytelling and finding new ways of, like, I mean, who would have looked at a book cart and said, there's content,
Yeah. No.
and finding a sort of a humorous access point. And but on that thread of story that you've mentioned, when you're working with clients, do they have, I'll call it, the seeds or the fundamentals of their story, in a state where they can articulate that, or do you help them piece it together and come up with their unique selling proposition?
Most often not. Most often it's a case of us having to pull that together. I think, a lot of it feels really muddled and unclear for a lot of people where they are in their business, certainly at the solopreneur level. And so it is a matter of, like, pulling out the pieces that feel the most comfortable, because when you're really comfortable in a topic, it's easier to show up and talk about that topic. So for us, it's a lot of, finding clarity in what can feel really muddy, right? In terms of, well, I have this thing and I do that thing, and this is why I started, right? And it can feel like that's where that feeling of, like, I don't know what to say. And it's like, well, yeah, you do. It's just, you don't have the clarity on it yet, on how to make that, that presented in a compelling way. And I think what's most interesting and what I've found is that the things that feel actually really mundane to most entrepreneurs are the thing that is actually the most interesting for other people to know. And so I find that a lot of people take for granted how much they know, right? How compelling their story actually is. And the thing that, we just assume is this like mundane thing that we do every day or that, isn't actually that interesting about our business is often the thing that is the most powerful nugget that, anchors the entire story.
Do you find that they're, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, that in many ways they've been successful despite themselves?
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
like it's been organic. They found themselves. Oh, so we're at this juncture. We're talking to Laura. We don't know. In some ways, I can't tell you all the list of steps that I took to get here because some of it's luck,
Yeah.
opportunity, serendipity, whatever. But now I recognize that I can't, I'm at this point, I can't get from here to I'll call it my growth goals
Yeah.
without a recalibration, a rethinking, and to your point, articulating my story.
Yeah. I think there's a certain scrappiness for a solopreneur, right? To get to a place where you are in your business. Like you can just kind of shoot from the hip for a while and it can get you where you want to go. I think, sometimes people take for granted that, when you're starting a business, you end up selling and working with people that are in your immediate network right away. And so you may have like built your business through referral and you got to a point where things are going really well. And all of a sudden you've tapped out your own audience or whatever it may be. And you're like, okay, well now I need to, I've gotten myself to this point based on my own network or my pre-existing network. And now I really need to start amplifying it, but I don't have time or I
Right.
feel confused. I don't know where to start. And that is a fun place for me to come in because there's already so much proof and so much strength in that brand. It's just a matter of kind of smoothing out some of the edges and starting to put some strategy in place because it does, right? Social media can be a very all consuming thing. I mean, it was my full-time job for a brand. That's all I did, right? So
Right.
it can be a full-time job. And for most entrepreneurs, a lot of people start doing their own social media, and that's great because everybody has to start somewhere. But it comes to a point where it's just no longer sustainable. And so we work a couple of ways, right? It's either me helping them find ways for it to keep being sustainable for somebody that's maybe already on their team, a matter of training somebody that's on their team, giving them the strategy, and then showing them how to make it happen with a couple of touch points throughout the year. Or it's just they're at the point where they're ready for somebody to take it over altogether. But yeah, it's interesting. I certainly find people in different places, and I will say I turned down a lot of business as well, right? And if to my earlier point about if they don't have a face, if they're not willing to play that role,
Right.
or if they really lack clarity in terms of their overall messaging, it's like it makes no sense for us to take over if you're unclear in your business right now. It makes no sense for us to just do your social media. We've got some other foundational work to do first, which we can support them there too. And for that, it makes it really fun.
Well, it's conversations I've had before, but I'm curious when as you said, when you're having, I'll call it some preliminary conversations with a prospective client, are
Yeah.
you sort of testing the waters to see, will they be accountable? Are they willing to make the necessary changes?
Yeah.
Not just being if they're not the face of the organization right now, are they willing to be? But then beyond that, are they, the phrase, are they willing to do the work?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big part of it because the reality is, as agency owners, you are held accountable for a lot of things, and some of them are, almost like unrealistic things, right? And I am a mother. I have two young children. So I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I am very much in this season of my life where, yes, when I'm having a preliminary call with a prospective client, I need to know that this client is going to, yeah, hold up their end of it, right?
Right.
Because I cannot, not in this season of my life, martyr myself because my client isn't holding up their end of the deal. And the reality is, I will always be a disappointment as an agency if my client, and I think any agency will be a disappointment to a client that isn't able or willing to put in their share. And the one thing I like to tell people is like, I can't be your face, I can't be your voice, I can't do that for you. And so the way that we try to think about things is being more collaborative. And if it's not if I don't think that it will be a collaborative relationship, then it's just not going to be one that I will be the right person for. Because yeah, we do need, that is very, very important, especially in with the type of entrepreneur that I'm working with.
Well, it's interesting you say that. We were just exhibiting at a conference, and someone came up by our display and said, "Can you guarantee an increase in revenue?"
Yeah.
And my sometimes when something a question like that, maybe not the exact wording, comes up, it's saying we are willing to be responsible for what we have control over.
Yeah.
But if there's a whole bunch of other factors in place, and it sounds like the marketers get beat up by saying, "Oh, like it, you I'm trying to spin my answer." But
Mhm.
in the example with social, I say to people, we can drive more traffic to the quote door of your store, the online
Yeah.
store. But if for whatever reason they don't like the way the product is presented, the messaging that we didn't write doesn't convert, or they don't like the vibe or the prices, like whatever, we've done our job, which is to get more, raise awareness, more eyeballs, more
Yeah.
traffic. But that's what we have control over.
Yeah.
And now it's out of our hands. And but you're asking, to your point, you see a red flag when they're asking you to be a martyr for things outside of your domain.
Yeah. And that's just it. Is like I will absolutely measure myself on the things that we can control. I will measure myself on, did we actually drive traffic to the places that we want to drive traffic? Did we, get the signups for, the email list and the thing, those sorts of things. But yeah, to your point, we can get them to the door, and I'm happy to be measured against our ability to get them to the door. That's fair. But when I'm laughing, I'm sort of stumbling over my words and laughing because I've just recently went through this experience at the beginning of the year. It's like when I get the breakdown from the client of the amount spent on social versus total sales, and total annual or monthly business sales over that amount of time. And the client says to me, well, we've spent this amount of money and made this amount of sales, and this is the cost per sale. And I'm like, wait a second, this was never the conversation. If it's not an entirely a social media issue, if we've got fewer sales than you'd hoped, but like look at how many people have gone to your site. And when those aren't the same, then that's totally just a misalignment
Yeah.
of and as an agency owner, there's always learning there, right? It's like, okay, well, what did I obviously there was some communication management that maybe fell by the wayside to even be receiving that kind of an email. But I think that it is important to set those expectations. And I do think that, yes, we're not responsible as social media owners to make the sale happen. But I do think that we have a responsibility to get people to the door.
Mhm. Well, but that also speaks to, you use sort of the callback to your German automotive example. They
Yeah.
can spend $1,000 on a YouTube video, and it troubles no one.
No one.
But when you're talking to a solopreneur who's trying to take their business from X to Y, $1,000 to them, I mean, that was blood and sweat. And
Yep.
so they're going to, rightly or wrongly, they're going to have some accountability tied to that they're going to they're going to want to talk to you about.
Yeah. I mean, I have memories of doing, talking about $1,000 YouTube
Mm.
video. I have memories of doing like $12,000 plus the cost of travel, plus vehicles, plus, plus food, plus for, probably all in $35,000 for one YouTube video. And like for a lot of small businesses, that's like their yearly marketing budget. We're not doing that for one 3-minute video.
Or that
Um,
can hire an agency.
that can hire an
Mm.
agency for an entire year to create that content. Like it's totally different
Yeah.
can of worms. And yeah, to your point, it is, there is a lot more at stake for a small business. And, I sort of giggle about my experience, but I also, there's two sides of it. It's like my responsibility as an agency owner to say like, okay, is this business going to be a fit for me and the way that I want to, experience the world as a young mother and as somebody that loves this work? Is this person going to hold up their end of the deal? Are they going to allow me to continue to love this work. That's the one side. And then the other side of it is, am I the right person? Is my team the right team that actually can do this? Like,
Mhm.
is this my zone of genius? Is this where we can be really successful? And, if the answer is no, then I'll always be honest about that.
Do you find there's a distinction, or do you find a difference in needs and wants between an entrepreneur that's a service provider versus an entrepreneur that's leading a product company?
Yes, very much so. I would say like my product based business friends are a lot more. They have more overhead, right? They're a lot more
It's more capital
concerned.
intensive.
It's way more capital intensive, and so the pressure on them. I mean, now that depends, right? I've got some clients that make products and they do so really inexpensively, and their margins are incredible, and so for them it's like okay, but so some of it depends on where their margins are for sure. But I would say yes. So service based businesses are generally dealing with a lower volume of sales. They're not needing to get 50 sales a day or whatever to be in a good place. Whereas a product based business is dealing usually with a volume game unless they're selling something that's really high value
Right.
luxury goods. So I do find in general, like when I think about myself, we do have product based businesses in the agency, and I tend to skew a little bit more on the service side of things in terms of my own zone of genius, because that's where I've spent a lot of my time. Obviously luxury brands as well, but when we're talking about small business, unless the product is something that's in like a zone. I know we have a very small team agency. It's me and 3 other people. So I have my
Mhm.
hands in everything.
Right.
But if it's an audience, if it's a niche that I know really well, then I'm for it. But I do find in general that service-based businesses, there's a little less, I don't want to use the word pressure, but there's less, the word helicoptering is coming to mind, like just less like wanting to have your fingers in it all the time, and they're just a little bit more, they're fine with it taking a little longer. I think some of it is because that's just the nature of the business, is that when you're in a service-based business, the sales cycle can be a little bit longer, right? You're having longer conversations, you're building relationships sometimes over time, whereas
Mhm.
with product, a lot of product is like that immediate impulsive purchase. And so for a client that's not seeing the volume, that can feel stressful.
We've had the same experience with when we had service provider clients. There's the word that comes to mind is they're more patient.
Yeah.
The sales cycle is longer. There's potentially bigger ticket, bigger margin. When
Yeah.
we've been, I'll call it more of a packaged good type play. Um, lower margin, less patience.
Yeah.
Where are the sales? And even though we'll show signs of saying, you hired us for social, here are all the indicators of what we've accomplished during our engagement.
Yeah.
And we even can illustrate some of the things that are problematic about the content on their website. Incorrect images, typos in the like whatever. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
slam them, but I'm similar to you. I'm more cautious now about product companies, about
Yeah.
fit, and
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting because, I have worked in this space for a really long time. Or at least what feels like a really long time. And, with the right owner, the right CEO, I have a couple of product-based business clients that come to mind in the agency that have just the right CEO with the right mindset. They understand, they're bought in, they're, making the videos I need them to make, even though they're on the other side of the continent, like they're doing the things, they are bought in, they understand that these things take time.
right.
That's a dream client, right? It's product service, they've bought in, they're doing what I need them to do. They give you the, when you're in a relationship for a while, you sort of get that, you're kind of at arm's length a little bit. They give you a little bit more rope. They're not stressing over, every single word post. Like you have the freedom. And I think when, you can get to that point with a client where you have the freedom and the client isn't, wanting to have their hands in everything, that makes everything easier as well. And that's where I think you can find success. But when you have, the flip side where it does feel like the client wants to have their hands in everything, you're writing or creating what you think is going to be great. And then it's like, well, we don't like that sound. That's not, that's the sound that that's too young of a song and we're an older brand, or that's not the word we would use. We prefer this image, or that image is a little too brown. And you're just like, okay, guys, like, you know, you hired us to be the
Yeah.
people that are driving this thing. Um, you need to let us drive. And so I think, for me, and this is an ongoing learning.
Yeah.
I've taken on clients where you've been in seasons of your business where it's like, I need the work, so I'll take it on. And I'm really fortunate to be in place now where it's like, no, I'm going to be selective. Because I've, come from a background of, corporate background and corporate social media and big brands, and been in very stressful environments. And I'm just in a season of my life now where I want to work collaboratively with people, have that, mutual respect and understanding. And so I do think that when to my earlier point where I turned down a lot of business, it's just because I desire to have a really productive collaborative relationship with the people that I work with. And very much like a work with energy, not a work for energy, which is really significant for me, having been in the work for world for a really long time, and knowing that, when I think about my life and how I want to live and the relationships that I want to have, it's the work with, it has to be.
Well, and to your point, if you're intent on having your business be, have longevity,
Yeah.
you need to be able to derive joy from it, and that's only going to
Yes.
be from a work with situation.
Yeah.
And we face the same issue as, like, so you hired us to be, I'll call it, strategic advisors, and we often are challenged to, we give the advice, and some clients choose to ignore it, or
Yeah.
they water it down, and so you kind of go, okay, well, it's your discretion. But sometimes we can't know in advance whether they're going to work a certain way. But to your
Yeah.
point, we're at a stage now where we can we try as best as we can to recognize fit. Will this be a
Yep.
work with situation or a work for?
Yeah.
And we know how that plays out if it's the work for. It's not as joy filled as you would hope.
No. No, and it's so important, like not just for you as the owner, but also for the people that are on your team, right? When we think about, like, the thing that I value most in my life is joy and freedom. And if I'm feeling neither of those in my business, like, that's a problem. And I'm in a place now where I love all of my clients. I have beautiful relationships with all of them, and that creates so much ease for me just in my life, right? It's not just in my business, but in my life. And so I don't want to mess with that. And I think that's really important as an entrepreneur, whether you have young kids or, you have a family, you have partners, like, it's so easy for the things that happen to you in your business to start to translate into other areas of your life. And, when I think about my priorities, myself, my partner, my kids come before my business. It always will. And certainly when having a corporate background, I've had to kind of retrain some of that, because there was certainly in the early stages of entrepreneurship, my business came first above everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't productive for me at all from a happiness perspective. And so I think, it's always, there's always going to be more opportunity. And so saying no to somebody that doesn't feel like a fit culturally for the energy that I want to have in my world, the energy that I want to put on my team, will always be more important for me than just taking a client because we need the work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'll call it a closing question,
Yeah.
to pick up on that, if you had some advice to give, or when you talk about the clients that you work with, are you guiding them, or in how to reframe their thinking on their business? So to your point, it is about them first.
Yeah.
If they have not just a business partner, but a life partner, like, to recalibrate their priorities, and maybe not be, to succumb to the overwhelm
Yeah.
of the business.
Yeah, big time. That's a big piece that I do in the coaching side of my business. Because I was, I had my daughter in 2017 and I owned a gym at the time. And I had my very fresh baby next to me in the hospital. And I was on my laptop responding to client inquiries for my gym. And, I look back at that version of myself, and there's like there's no way I would still be an entrepreneur. I would still be in this game of entrepreneurship if I was still living in that mindset, because that is not a way to live. And so for me, yes, there's a really big part of the work that I do that has to do with finding balance, because I think that your business should exist to serve you, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And so a big part of what I do is helping people navigate that. And I think that's a big part of why I have a lot of moms in my world, women entrepreneurs, mom entrepreneurs, who really love their businesses and have this ambition and this desire to succeed, but they also deeply desire to be devoted mothers and to be devoted partners and to have this other side of their life. And it can feel really all consuming. And so that's work that I've really had to undo over the last 5 years for myself. My daughter is almost 6, so she'll be 6 in June. So, it's been work that I've had to undo over the last 5-6 years. And it's a big part of my coaching practice and my mentorship practice is showing people how to, put systems in place so that they can buy back their time, get their supports, have their employees in place so that they can actually enjoy their life, because business can be really all consuming.
Is there anything else you would add to that in terms of advice for people considering entrepreneurship, or for similar to your clients, people who find themselves in sort of a state of feeling stuck or
I would
crossroads?
I think that for a lot of us, it's our ego that gets in the way, and it's like we're doing this thing and we get stuck in this, I call it the hamster wheel. And so I think like the advice is truly to ask for help, to speak that this is the season that you're in, because usually when we find ourselves in these seasons of, feeling all encompassed by the things that are going on in our business, is there's other people that have been through it, and being able to reach out for help and find strategies. Cause that's honestly what it is. It's strategy. It's not just thinking, oh, I'm just going to shift my mindset and that'll be fine. There's a big piece of it.
That flicking a switch.
There's no switch that you can just flip. Like there is strategy in place. And how do you set up your business so that you're not sacrificing your sanity in the process? And I think, the advice is really like, there is help to be found. You don't have to do it alone. And I think, that's why our businesses exist, because we're able to take tasks away from entrepreneurs, CEOs in their businesses, whether that's a social media task, but then certainly, on my coaching side of my business, it's, what are the other things that we can outsource, whether that's a VA or, in the case of big motherhood, is there a nanny that you can bring in? Is it childcare? Like, what are the elements of your life that you can outsource to other people, life and business, to create more space? Because like burnout's just not an option when you're an entrepreneur. And so, because if you burn out, one of two things happen. You either stop your business because you can't do it anymore, or the way that you service your clients or your products or whatever it is that you create starts to suffer, and then your business just ends anyway because, your clientele is no longer happy. And so I think the big piece is just like, you're still amazing. There's no shame in asking for help, right? Finding help is actually like admitting that you need help is a sign of strength. And I think, for so many solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, we just think, oh, I'm just going to do it all alone. But that's actually not the thing that's going to change anything.
Well, and to what you were saying earlier, burnout will fail. You're failing yourself. You're failing your partner. And if you have children, you're failing them too. And I don't say that as judgment. That's just...
No, it's just truth.
Yeah.
It's just fact. Yeah. And I've been there, and I say that like from experience, when I have a podcast that's called This Mother Means Business. And in one of the first episodes, I talk about, that experience of in 2017 of being in the hospital, putting my business before myself, my partner, and my child. And, I got to a place where I just about lost everything. And fortunately, I was able to turn most of that stuff around. But yeah, I've had that experience, right? Where, I allowed myself to burn out, and that cost me everything that actually mattered. And so learning how to rebuild all of that it's been a process.
Well, I want to thank you for spending time with me to share those lessons. Hard-won lessons, but like as you said, you're on the other side of it. So thank you so much for your time today and everything you shared.
Thanks, Andrew. This was so fun.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.